This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
US President Joe Biden meets with the UK Prime Minister ahead of the G7 summit. The Africa CDC urges countries to enhance prevention measures amid a third wave of COVID-19. And the Central African Republic Prime Minister resigns. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe's finance minister projects an optimistic 7.8% growth rate this year. And Nigeria requires social media companies operating in the country to register a local entity. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Let's start the hour in the United Kingdom, where US President Joe Biden has met the British Prime Minister in Cornwall. It is the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders. A meeting comes on the eve of the G7 meeting. Their formal meeting is likely to dwell on the need to support the Northern Ireland Protocol. Northern Ireland is currently caught up in a dispute between the UK and the EU over Brexit. Biden has maintained that the standoff should not affect the ongoing peace process in the region. Well, Navid Jabakal now takes us through the preparations for the G7 summit in Cornwall.
Looking out over the Cornish coast, this is picturesque postcard Britain. But look a little closer and there are warships at sea and police patrolling the streets. For local business owners like Chris and Francine, hosting the G7 summit here in St Ives has come at a cost.
It's all dropped off this week. We're sort of at 50% at the moment because I think it's deterring people. As you say, you've seen the signs that say avoid the area everywhere, which that doesn't do much for your guests wanting to come in, does it? Or any last minute bookings. They're scared to come down, to be honest, I think.
Despite the short-term disruption to life, the local economy here could see a wider boost from the G7 spotlight, worth up to $70 million.
Cornwall is very well known in the UK. It's known in a couple of markets like Germany, but the rest of the world probably doesn't even know Cornwall exists. And they probably think the English coast is rather boring and not very pretty. So for us, it's absolutely publicity we can't buy.
Arriving with the usual high security, President Biden's the main guest here this week on his maiden foreign trip since entering the White House.
This is the first time the leaders will meet in person since the start of the pandemic, and what a different world we're in. COVID-19 will be top of the agenda, but the group faces other challenges, from climate change, which is being felt in communities like this worldwide, to trade policies as they look to kickstart global growth. All issues that will need wider cooperation with non-G7 states if they're to be solved.
4 guest nations are also at the event this year: Australia, South Africa, South Korea and India, in what's being billed a gathering of like-minded democracies. The meetings and the mingling will be largely behind closed doors, but what happens here on the South English coast will be watched closely around the world. Navid Jabakal, CGTN, St Ives.
Well, with the G7 meeting set to begin in the UK, focus now shifts on how leaders of the 7 major economies relate with Africa. Supporters of the group say it plays a big role in shaping decisions that affect the world. But critics have indicated that there are shortcomings as far as follow-up on these decisions is concerned. Of course, this year's main focus will be recovery from COVID-19 and the avoidance of future pandemics. But the unequal distribution of vaccines has put the promises by G7 leaders to Africa into sharp focus. Some African nations accuse them of insincerity. For more on this, I'm now joined by Ifediora Chimezia Amobi, an economist working with the government of Anambra State in Nigeria. He joins us via Zoom from Enugu. Mr. Amobi, of course, global health and responding to future pandemics tops the G7 agenda this year. But we have seen high-income countries hoard COVID-19 vaccines and resist calls for patent waivers at the expense of poorer countries. Should Africa be hopeful about the outcomes of these conversations at the G7 summit?
In one word, I would say yes. And the reason I say yes is that patent waivers have been something that has been, highly debated about. We have Africa with a population of about 1.335 billion people, of which, from WHO counts, there are about 5 million COVID cases to date, or slightly over 5 million COVID cases to date, which is, in proportion, is actually a very, very small number. It's less than half a percentage point of the total population of Africa. However, the large countries like the US and the UK and other European countries, including India and China and Russia to a large extent, have, yes, like you rightly said, hoarded these COVID vaccines because they have manufactured them and saved them for their own people in the first instance. We are thankful to outfits like COVAX that has been able to ensure distribution of COVID vaccines to low-income countries and most countries around Africa, Latin America, and other parts of Asia and the Caribbean. However, when it comes to their patents and waiving their patents,
yes,
that is something that we really need them to do. If they don't do that, it means that we're going to have to wait for them to produce, and a lot of the, for lack of a better word, ingredients or raw materials used in the production of these vaccines will be made available to other pharmaceutical outfits or research firms that also want to get
Mr. Amobi, just to emphasize a particular question that is emerging at the moment on this issue is that the G7 is being criticized for sometimes lacking follow-through, and in some respects it's been called ineffective and irrelevant. What is your view on that?
Well, I wouldn't actually say they've been ineffective. I mean, the G7 has been around. This is, they've had quite a number of summits. Yes, one could say that they could be slow in implementing a lot of what have been discussed. They have been called talk shops in some quarters, but I think that they have been quite effective in areas such as, strengthening economies, especially at the international level, doing quite a lot in areas of policy, security, terrorism and counterterrorism, global issues such as climate change, gender-related issues, and then just bringing the international community together, working in areas of, disarmament and, crisis and conflict, resolution.
Yes. And Mr. Amobi, Mr. Amobi, of course, the G7 in itself is something of an exclusive group. So in your view, how can Africa leverage itself to sit at the table alongside these powerful countries and be seen as a partner and not just a continent that is seeking aid and support?
Well, that can actually be done, but it's going to be a tall order. The G7, basically, countries that have done quite a lot. They're democratic. They have, large economies. They control, a big proportion of the global GDP, etc. African countries are not up to that level yet. There are some of them, we're actually doing quite a lot in terms of playing within that field, but we're not there yet. We have to do quite a lot. We have to really strengthen our own economies. We have to undergo reforms. We have to be a bit more democratic than we are. We have to be open and transparent and accountable to the people. We have to be able to deliver on a lot of the economic and social, services that our people require. We have to depend less on aid and less on the Western countries that make up the G7.
Indeed.
And so at this moment in time, we just like even at this G7, where they invited countries like South Korea and South Africa to, participate and observe. I think we should be able to be doing that for now until we can grow our economies to such a point where we can now sit at the same table.
Yeah, I suppose it's about earning one's seat at that table. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for that analysis. Ifediora Chimezia Amobi joining us there from Enugu in Nigeria. Well, Africa has welcomed the United States' commitment to buy and donate 500 million Pfizer doses to be distributed through the COVAX facility. The doses will be distributed to 92 lower-income countries and the African Union. The announcement of the vaccine donation comes ahead of Biden's meeting with other G7 leaders. The U.S. drug maker Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech have confirmed they will provide 200 million doses in 2021 and 300 million doses in the first half of 2022. The shots will be produced in the U.S. and will be provided at a not-for-profit price. The U.S. now becomes COVAX's largest vaccine donor and the single largest funder with a $4 billion commitment.
Will these doses contribute to the need and progress towards achieving a 60% immunization? Absolutely. It's going to be a big support for that. Shall we be able to use the vaccines on the continent? My position has always been clear. If you give me Pfizer vaccines, I will use them on the continent because you can use them easily in major cities where you have electricity and the minus 80s or 70s deep freezers. And those deep freezers do not cost excessively, they are not excessively expensive. With $10,000 to $12,000, you can get a minus 70 or 80 degrees. And that one of them can store up to about 300,000 doses of vaccine. So I think it's a question of having the vaccines in a timely and predictable manner. That way we can plan. Planning is key in any scale-up or vast vaccination program.
Well, the director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has also announced that the continent was going through a third wave of COVID-19 and stressed the need to enhance prevention measures.
On the 8th of May, we convened an emergency meeting of the ministers of health and agreed on adapted strategy in anticipation of that. Anyway, because we knew that we were going to definitely have a third wave because that is the nature of pandemics. And there are three things that we continue to highlight. One is that we must enhance our prevention efforts. And that will include two things, that the public health measures must be maintained, including masking, social distancing, avoiding crowded space, because when we crowd come together, you offer the virus a chance to spread. I think that is just very important. And masks worked, we know that. And masks for now are our best vaccines for the continent. We're waiting for large-scale vaccinations to happen maybe later towards the end of the year.
Authorities in Uganda have expressed concern as a second wave of coronavirus infections sweeps through the country. They say hospitals are overwhelmed with COVID-19 patients and the demand for vaccines has more than doubled. Authorities have been made to recall doses from rural areas because they don't have nearly enough to fight bigger outbreaks in the cities. President Yoweri Museveni has responded to the rise in cases by imposing restrictions on travel within the country. So far, the East African nation has reported more than 55,000 infections and 392 deaths. This according to Johns Hopkins University.
The situation is dire. We are officially having what we would refer to as a second COVID wave. So we are admitting lots of patients who are critically ill. First of all, there's the rate of number of cases that we are registering per day is going higher and higher. I think as per last week, I hope I have the stats right, but probably 1,000 patients tested positive.
The demand for the vaccine has more than doubled following this upsurge in the number of cases reported. And also we are almost completing the 94,000 doses we received both from the COVAX facility and also the Indian government, 100,000 doses.
In Nigeria, the coronavirus has worsened an already severe oxygen deficit at health centers in the country in an effort to learn lessons from India, which has grappled with significant oxygen shortages. The Nigerian government has been constructing oxygen plants in each state of the country. And as Tesem Akenda reports, the project is estimated to cost $17 million.
Stephanie Adams is a full-time homemaker who nearly died 10 years ago due to the lack of oxygen at the health center in Jos, not central Nigeria. Eventually, she found one with oxygen. Stephanie considers herself lucky and says she knows many who died because they couldn't access oxygen.
When I was sick and I needed oxygen, I went to so many hospitals looking for oxygen. There was no oxygen. I was lucky to have one, and I was lucky I scaled through it. Other hospitals don't have it. So many hospitals don't have it, and people are dying. People are dying. Most especially in this our area of this COVID-19.
While Stephanie found help, others haven't been so lucky. Nigeria's health ministry says an estimated 625,000 lives are lost yearly to diseases associated with insufficient oxygen in the blood. The nation's Center for Disease Control says things have gotten worse since the outbreak of coronavirus in the country. It says over 2,000 people have died from the disease alone, most of them due to lack of oxygen at health centers.
Oxygen administration has been a very serious challenge in the healthcare services delivery. Most of the time we find it very difficult because the availability is not adequate enough. And it is essential that any hospital facility should have enough oxygen for patients that deserve oxygen administration.
The government has now approved a sum of 6.5 billion naira, around $17 million, for the construction of at least one oxygen plant in each state of the country. Health professionals say it's a necessary move.
Taking this giant stride is very important. Nigerian citizens will really welcome it, especially the health personnel, because we have seen the great need of having this oxygen in abundance for our patients that require its administration.
But the health workers have a demand from the government. The health professionals want the government to engage the right hands to execute the project. They are calling for reputable medical personnel without a history of corruption to be part of it. They say their expertise will be necessary to prevent mistakes in implementation. The government says it is determined to fight corruption in all sectors. If the oxygen plants are built correctly, health workers believe they will make a big difference. And people like Stephanie won't have to search for oxygen until their last breath. Tesem Akenda, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. The Central African Republic Prime Minister resigns. And the UN calls for more security deployment in eastern DRC after a series of clashes. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Prime Minister of the Central African Republic, Firmin Grebada, has announced his government's resignation without mentioning the reason. In a post to Twitter on Thursday, Grebada said he had presented his resignation and that of the government to the president, Faustin Archange Touadera. But a presidential spokesman was quoted by AFP as saying that Grebada may be asked to stay and form a new government. Grebada has held the premiership since early 2019. He was a former chief of staff to Touadera. President Touadera was re-elected in December 2020 on low voter turnout. Elections were hampered by armed rebels that controlled around 2/3 of the country. Since then, the army, backed by UN peacekeepers, Rwandan special forces and Russian paramilitaries, has taken back much of the territory from rebel control. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has announced a new cabinet and appointed women to top posts. Uganda now joins Ethiopia, Rwanda and South Africa with a significant number of women in cabinet. President Museveni believes the new ministers will help him spearhead economic growth in a country that has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
A television journalist turned politician, Agnes Nandutu is the new Minister for Karamoja Affairs, and she's gearing up for the task ahead.
We are in charge as women, and in the next 5 years, the President has entrusted us. We are going to drive this country to the middle income status.
Agnes joins several other women who have been appointed in key ministerial positions, including the Vice President, the Prime Minister, and all the Deputy Prime Ministers. The new ministers will now face Parliament's Appointments Committee for vetting, and those who will make it through this process will take on the task of providing better services to the locals. President Yoweri Museveni says he wants to fight endemic corruption in the country.
To achieve these aims, we must defeat corruption and disorientation, and we shall defeat them. Corruption has become a real enemy.
But anti-corruption campaigners argue that the president should do more than appointing women in top offices.
If you're to improve services in our country, you don't need a bloated cabinet. What we need to see is political will. We have the laws in place, we have the institutions in place. Are the laws working? Are the institutions working? Even if you put men or women, it doesn't matter as long as you have people of integrity.
Uganda's new cabinet has got 80 ministers. The president believes having more political envoys in the community like Agnes Nandutu could help improve service delivery and also promote economic growth. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
MONUSCO, the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC, has called for increased deployment of security forces in the eastern part of the country. This after 19 people were killed in a series of clashes. MONUSCO spokesperson Matthias Gilman says the remoteness of the area has made it susceptible to attacks. Now, according to the medical charity MSF, 10 civilians were killed and a hospital was destroyed in the village of Boga on Monday. Several other bodies were found after farmers were targeted near the border between North Kivu and Ituri provinces. The two provinces have been destabilized by violence blamed on a Ugandan rebel group, the Allied Democratic Forces. Here's CGTN's Chris Ochamringa with more.
So no group has claimed responsibility for this latest attack, although the leaders in Ituri province say have blamed it on the Allied Democratic Forces. This is an Islamist militia group that has its origins in neighboring Uganda, and they are accused of killing at least 300 civilians since the start of this year. But there is another group of local leaders from Ituri province who believe it was carried out by another militia group, because a week ago there was another attack that was carried out in Boga village and Chabi village in Ituri province, where at least 52 people were killed. So the army spokesperson of Ituri province says that they are pursuing the armed men who carried out this attack, and that they will do everything possible to ensure that they bring justice to the victims. But the local people I've spoken to from Ituri province say this is exactly what the government has always been saying, you know, whenever attacks happen. And so they are sick and tired of this kind of responses. What the people there want to see is an end to the fighting, the killings of people. They want to return to the fields to farm and do their ordinary have the ordinary life that they have been leading over the years. Well, this state of siege was imposed in April, in early April, and it was supposed to run for 30 days. Those 30 days elapsed early this month, and the president asked Parliament to extend it for another 15 days. Now, according to some security analysts I've spoken to, they're saying 45 days is a very short period to wipe out, to root out all these rebels that have been operating in eastern DRC. It requires more time. The president said they're going to increase the funding to the troops so that they can be able to battle all these rebel groups. The UN estimates there are more than 120 rebel groups operating in North Kivu province. And so the people hope that in due course we're going to see a change and we're going to see a return of peace in that part of the DRC.
The humanitarian situation caused by the eruption of Mount Nyiragongo in the DRC in May remains precarious. While many have started going back to their houses, thousands left homeless by the eruption remain in shelters. CGTN's Joy Kiruki-Juma reports.
These are the living conditions of those displaced when Mount Nyiragongo erupted in May. Veronica Suzanne, a widow who lives with 2 of her children, had her house destroyed by the lava. She now shares this shelter in Kayembe, eastern DRC, where thousands sought refuge.
We live in suffering. I don't eat and I suffer from a stomach that hurts a lot every day. When I don't know what to eat, sometimes I take water. Today I haven't eaten anything. We are afraid of cholera, even malaria. Look, I used to be bigger, but I lost my weight.
The story is no different for Kizito Alexis, a father of 4.
Unfortunately, we went back, everything was damaged, and we didn't know what to do. That's why we came here to build a temporary house at Kayembe School. There are already diseases because we don't even have toilets or water.
Health workers are concerned about the growing crisis. They have identified diarrhetic diseases, respiratory infections, malaria, and suspected cases of cholera.
We're still talking about a lot of people who need urgent healthcare, who need to have enough water, drinking water too. And then the minimum shelter, the food. So there you go, it's still considered a precarious situation. What we see, even where we work and where we are providing support with free healthcare, we see a lot of diseases linked to the water that is not of good quality, including diuretic diseases and often a lot of malaria too. We see many respiratory infections. You have to know that the living conditions are a big part of the situation.
The May 22nd eruption left over 30 people dead and displaced thousands others. The government of North Kivu has said those who lost houses will remain in shelters, but the rest can go back to their houses. A journey of healing and restoration that is expected will take time. Joy Kiruki-Juma, CGTN.
To Ethiopia now, where the World Food Programme says the hunger situation is worrying. The UN agency says at least 4 million people in the Tigray region are in dire need of food. Chamgono has more.
In an abandoned construction site in Tigray, Aster, not her real name, has a temporary dwelling. She is a victim of a recent attack by a local gang, which destroyed her crops and burned down her house. With neither food nor shelter, she now banks on hope for her daily survival.
There were about 20 of them. They gathered around my house and destroyed all my crops. I have nightmares of my house from before it was burned down. We had to flee to another area. They kept getting closer, burning all harvested crops and straw, and continued setting fire to everything. They burned everything I had.
Aster is one of the many displaced residents of Tigray in Ethiopia, who are in the grips of a crippling food shortage. The ongoing armed conflict in the region that began in late 2020 has aggravated what was an already bad situation in the region, according to World Food Programme.
So this is a region that even prior to the conflict has been affected by shocks in recent years. We had the desert locust this past year, hailstorms, some pockets of the region that are already chronically affected by drought. it means that this is an area that's already a bit on the edge. And so now with the conflict, the disruption of health systems, the collapse of markets in many areas, the inability to plant today because people don't have access to seeds, fertilizer, or the security to be able to plant, means that for WFP, the #1 priority is going to continue to be that humanitarian assistance until the situation allows people to resume their livelihoods activities and meet their own food security needs.
The UN body says it is shocked by the latest data, which says at least 4 million people are in dire need of food supplies. The organization has already deployed 180 humanitarian workers to distribute food to 1.4 million residents. But 350,000 people are reported to be facing catastrophic levels of hunger. The Ethiopian government approved distribution of humanitarian aid to the region in February. Government insists that proper humanitarian aid is being delivered in Tigray. Chamgono, CGTN.
Well, US President Joe Biden is currently in the UK in his first overseas visit as president. Let's go live now to Cornwall, where the US President is giving some remarks regarding COVID-19 vaccines.
About how our two nations can together lead the global fight against COVID-19. That's been a major focus of the G7 under British leadership, particularly in focusing and coordinating our resources to help vaccinate the world. And tonight, I'm making an historic announcement regarding America's leadership in the fight against COVID-19. America knows firsthand the tragedies of this pandemic. We've had more people die in the United States than anywhere in the world. Nearly 600,000 of our fellow Americans, moms, dads, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, grandparents, more deaths from COVID-19 in the United States than from World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined. We know the tragedy. We also know the path to recovery. The United States has now vaccinated 64% of our adults with at least one shot. Just 4.5 months ago, we were at only 5% with one shot. It took a Herculean effort on the part of our government to manage one of the biggest and I would say most complicated logistical challenges in our history. It took the ingenuity of scientists, building on decades of research to develop a vaccine. It took the full capacity of American companies manufacturing and delivering the vaccines around the clock. And as a result, we have the lowest number of daily deaths since the first day of this pandemic. Our economy is rebounding. Our vaccination program has already saved tens of thousands of lives, with that count growing each day, and has allowed millions of Americans get back to living their lives. And from the beginning of my presidency, we've been clear-eyed that we need to attack this virus globally as well. This is about our responsibility, our humanitarian obligation to save as many lives as we can, and our responsibility to our values. We value the inherent dignity of all people. In times of trouble, Americans reach out to offer help and offer a helping hand. That's who we are. And when we see people hurting and suffering anywhere around the world, we seek
well,
to help.
That is U.S. President Joe Biden live there in Cornwall, talking about the U.S. experience with the COVID-19 and, of course, the U.S. recovery through its mass vaccination program. Joe Biden there sharing the fact that the United States will be playing a major role in a coordinated global response to vaccinate the world's population. Of course, he is speaking on the eve of the G7 summit, which starts on Friday in Cornwall. Right, let's turn to Ethiopia now. The country's health minister, Dr. Leah Tadesse, has announced that over 50% of health facilities in the Tigray region have started operations. Tadesse says the task force organized to restore the health system in the region has been able to work with various stakeholders and has registered some major results.
One of the first focus areas in terms of the recovery response in the health system is the functionality or resuming functionality of health facilities. Currently, 55% of the hospitals and 52% of the health centers in the region have been made functional. If you have seen our report last week, the figure was about 46% for both health centers and hospitals, which is 52% currently, because the past 1 week, 10 more health centers have become functional. Through the functional health facilities and the mobile health teams, the past 2 months, more than 409,000 people have received services, including maternal and child health services, delivery, HIV, TB, and non-communicable diseases, and others. As part of the functionality of health services, improving ambulance services is the other key area of focus. Because the region has also lost many of its ambulances, additional support has been given, with 12 ambulances being supported by the Ministry of Health, 8 supported from the different regions, and currently we have 58 ambulances operating under the Regional Health Bureau within the region.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe's finance minister projects an optimistic 7.8% growth rate this year. And Nigeria requires social media companies operating in the country to register a local entity.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Zimbabwe, where Finance Minister Mtongana has far outstripped international expectations as far as economic growth projections are concerned. Now, the minister sees Zimbabwe growing by just under 8% this year, which of course is way more than twice the 3.1% that the International Monetary Fund projects. Now, he says his optimism is supported by the country coming off a low base and its economic reforms that have begun to bear fruit.
Economy is fixable. We are fixing it. Just check our track record in the last 2.5 years. The government has introduced a new currency, which didn't exist before. Every country needs its own currency so as to have monetary policy to supplement what's happening on the fiscal side. We have been managed to balance the budget. We have begun payments, token payments to the World Bank and the AFDB and the European Investment. We've started. We've also expressed that we desire to begin payments, no matter how small, to the 17 Paris Club members that Zimbabwe owes money. We want Zimbabwe to be known as a good debtor, not a bad debtor.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now, where social media firms that want to operate in the country must register a local entity and be licensed. Now, Nigeria's Information Minister Lai Mohammed said the new regulations will also include conditions for continued operation. Mohammed made this announcement on Wednesday in the government's latest move since it banned Twitter last week. Nigeria suspended Twitter's activities 2 days after the platform removed a tweet by President Muhammadu Buhari that threatened to punish secessionists. Now, Nigerian telecoms firms have since blocked access to the social media giant, and the move comes amid what critics say is a broader crackdown on the freedom of expression.
I think first and foremost, like I said, Twitter must register as a company in Nigeria. It will be licensed by the Broadcasting Commission, which is the regulatory agency, and must agree not allow its platform to be used by those who are promoting activities that are inimical to the corporate existence of Nigeria. We are not just banning Twitter because Twitter has been nasty to a particular person. No. We gave a specific reason. Twitter has continued to become the platform of choice for the separatist movement, IPOB. And we think that no country in the world will accept that.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has told young people in the country to, in quotes, behave in order to attract jobs and investment. Now, Nigeria, of course, has struggled with high unemployment and rapid population growth for decades. Unemployment rose to 33.3% in the fourth quarter of last year after the coronavirus pandemic struck before the country had fully recovered from a 2016 recession. Buhari has faced criticism over rising violence in nearly every region of the nation. Attacks, particularly in the north, have targeted farmers, worsening food inflation, which stood at 22.72% in April. Now, the president has said the government will take a tougher approach towards insecurity, particularly against bandits in the northwest and separatists in the southeast. Well, let's move on now. The Biden administration has reversed a Trump-era attempt to ban two popular Chinese-owned apps, namely TikTok and WeChat. The apps were never actually blocked in the U.S. due to legal challenges. But of course, efforts to keep them off American gadgets exacerbated tensions between the two nations. Here's CGTN's Rowie Rottenberg reporting.
TikTok has nearly 700 million monthly average users worldwide. The company says more than 100 million of them are here in the United States. The short video sharing app, known for its viral challenges, is very popular with young smartphone users. Last September, and again in December, federal judges blocked a Trump administration effort to ban its download in the U.S., a challenge that's remained stuck in the courts. Then President Donald Trump had been trying to arm-twist TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance to sell its American operations to American firms, claiming its data harvesting posed a national security threat. So too, he argued, did WeChat, a messaging, networking, and e-commerce super app that's wildly popular in China and among the Chinese diaspora. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden revoked 3 of Trump's executive orders that targeted the apps, instead issuing his own order seeking to identify apps that could pose, quote, an unacceptable risk to U.S. national security and to the American people, and ordering federal agencies to develop new guidelines to protect the public's personal information. Trump's attempted ban was seen as part of a larger effort to confront China. Beijing denounced those moves and others. Biden's approach is seen as more down the middle. It creates windows for a review process and a timeline for new criteria, but keeps in place a possible sanctions mechanism and the demand for TikTok's divestiture. The announcement comes just one day after the U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan bill authorizing some $200 billion in funding for science, technology, and research to better compete with Chinese advances. Beijing reacted, saying the U.S. should not treat China as a, quote, imaginary enemy. The bill still needs to pass the lower U.S. House and then get signed by President Biden. Both are likely, though it's unclear what the bill will look like by then. Rowie Ruttenberg, CGTN in Washington.
Meanwhile, China's Ministry of Commerce says the Biden administration removal of bans on TikTok and WeChat is a positive step in the right direction. Now, Gao Feng, spokesperson of the ministry, made these remarks at a press conference earlier on Thursday. Gao also calls for the fair treatment of Chinese companies from the U.S. government. It is because these apps are still under inspection by the U.S. Committee on Foreign Investment, and he further urges the U.S. government not to politicize economic and trade issues. And moving on, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development says Tunisia's economy will expand at an annual rate of 3% in 2021 and 2022. Now, in its latest economic outlook, the organization warns of coronavirus-related risks that could stifle the recovery of the country's vital tourism sector. From Tunis, here's Adnan Shawshi with the details.
Tunisia is hoping to jumpstart its economic recovery after a sharp decline in 2020 caused by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's Economy, Finance and Investment Development Minister said the government is optimistic about post-pandemic recovery this year and in 2022, buoyed by rising inoculations in the world.
The repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic will continue and affect more businesses and sectors. It's weakened the government's financial means and affected the population. However, GDP is projected to expand next year after a sharp decline amid the health crisis. The situation will certainly improve in the next few months.
The Paris-based Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, said the labor-intensive services sectors are critical for Tunisia's recovery. Authorities in Tunis have already launched an online platform to support the most vulnerable groups and people who have lost their jobs during the pandemic. The number of recipients is about 1.2 million families.
Our aim is to boost the national economy by supporting individuals whose businesses and earnings were affected. This exceptional relief fund will finance household incomes and increase private consumption. This initiative is in line with the state's economic relief program during and after the pandemic.
The OECD report stressed that the tourism sector is one of the most affected sectors by the health crisis. The North African nation's tourism revenues plunged 55% during the first 4 months of 2021 compared to the same period in 2020. Experts say the national vaccination drive will revive this vital industry and create new jobs.
Tourism is completely devastated due to travel restrictions, lockdowns and layoffs. Now that the vaccination campaign is underway, hotels are reopening and hiring. We do not expect 100% of tourist resorts to be operational this year, but tourism revival will boost the economy and contribute to GDP growth in the next season.
Ratings agency Standard & Poor's expects a modest recovery of 3.8% in 2021 after last year's sharp GDP contraction. The fund has, however, warned that Tunisia's debt to GDP is forecast to grow to 91.2% this year from 87.6% in 2020. According to the National Institute of Statistics, Tunisia's weak economy has been hit hard by the pandemic, with GDP contracting 8.8% last year. Authorities aim to improve the investment climate and boost exports while bringing the health crisis under control. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, East African nations, Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda presented their budget estimates for the next financial year today. We'll be taking a detailed look into them. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's take a short break. Your sports news still ahead. Coming up, Ethiopia's Gede sets a new 10,000-meter world record just days after it was broken by Sifan Hassan.